We assess the progress the country has made over the last 12 months, the opportunities it has seized, and the challenges that still lie ahead. December 8th, 2024 is now commemorated in Syria as Liberation Day, when opposition armed forces entered Damascus and declared Bashar al-Assad's rule over. Those events, you'll remember, unfolded during the last Doha Forum, taking the world by surprise and reshaping regional dynamics in ways very few expected, and of course, needless to say, overshadowing much of the discussions here at the Doha Forum. Our next session looks at what has changed over the last year, what has been achieved, and what challenges still lie ahead. Please welcome our distinguished panelists, Their Excellencies Mohammed bin Abdulaziz Al-Khulaifi, Minister of State of the State of Qatar, Asaad Hasan Al-Shaibani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Syrian Arab Republic, Espen Barth Eide, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway, and last but not least, Thomas Barrack, US Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey and Special Envoy to the Syrian Arab Republic. And please welcome your moderator, Charles Lister, Director of the Syria Program at the Middle East Institute.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this latest session of the Doha Forum. My name is Charles Lister from the Middle East Institute, and I'm delighted to be here on such an esteemed stage with esteemed colleagues. Last year, the Doha Forum witnessed history as Bashar al-Assad's regime came to an abrupt and dramatic end, closing a 53-year chapter of brutal dictatorial rule in Syria. In the year since, the country's transition has proceeded forwards, facing down an extraordinary array of internal and external challenges. On the international stage, Syria has transformed from a global pariah to a fully fledged and, I think many would say, integral component of the international community. In fact, I gather that Syria has received in 12 months more international delegations from more countries around the world than Syria has done over the previous 5 decades. At home, Syria bears the brunt of 14 years of debilitating conflict and decades of corrupt, divisive rule, leaving a broken economy, a traumatized population, a shattered state, and massive destruction. But despite all of these challenges, the world has rushed to engage and support the new Syria. I think buoyed by the historic opportunity that a stable, responsible, and recovering Syria will offer to regional and international peace and prosperity. So let me first start with Minister Al-Shaybani. It's very good to see you again, and thank you for being here. As you reflect on this past year, how would you summarize where things stand today after 12 months in terms of achievements, but also, I think, lessons learned from the threats and the challenges that you still face, both inside your country, but also from outside?
بداية أولا شكرا لكم على هذه الاستضافة. بالتأكيد عندما نتحدث عن سوريا في هذا الوقت أو خلال عام واحد وخاصة ما بعد 8 من ديسمبر فنحن نتكلم عن قصة نجاح صاغها السوريون بأنفسهم، وأيضا أوصلوا صورة سريعة للعالم بأن الشعب السوري قادر على أن يتجاوز الماضي وأيضا أن ينظر إلى المستقبل بعين الثقة وأيضا بإرادة قوية جدا. ما تم تحقيقه خلال سنة كاملة ربما يحتاج إلى الكثير من العمل في السنوات القادمة، ولكن الشيء الذي نحن سعداء فيه أننا أعدنا ثقة الشعب السوري بنفسه، الثقة التي كانت النظام قد ساهم في تشويهها وأيضا ساهم في إضعاف هذه الثقة، وأصدر الشعب السوري أو صدر الشعب السوري للعالم على أنه شعب تحت الضغط، تحت الحروب، شعب مستضعف، شعب لا يصلح لأن يكون من بين الدول المتطورة. فما استطعنا أن نحققه ونحن فخورين فيه هو مسألة أننا اليوم الشعب السوري ينظر إلى نفسه بثقة كبيرة جدا في كافة المجالات. بالتأكيد الدروس المستفادة أن أي حكومة تعمل لبلدها بإخلاص وتعمل أيضا بكامل قوتها ستنجز الكثير رغم قلة الإمكانيات ورغم الإرث الثقيل جدا الذي ورثناه من النظام السابق، إلا أننا ما تم المراهنة عليه أننا انطلقنا بدعم من شعبنا، وهذا ما أعطانا النجاحات التي كانت خلال السنة الماضية. وبالتأكيد إلى جانبي أيضا من زملائي شركائنا في هذا النجاح، والكل وقف إلى جانب سوريا حقيقة في هذا العام. وبالتأكيد الأعوام القادمة ستكون أكثر فيها الكثير من الحماسة والكثير من الانطلاق نحو المستقبل. وأننا بالتأكيد يعني ما وصلنا إليه يعطينا الثقة، ولكن لسنا راضين بهذه النتيجة. الشعب السوري يستحق أن تكون لديه دولة يعني أفضل من الوضع الحالي. وبالتأكيد الوضع المعيشي والاقتصادي في الداخل السوري لا يزال يعاني بشكل كبير، ولا تزال هناك أيضا عقبات قانونية وخاصة موضوع العقوبات الاقتصادية وأبرزها عقوبات سيسر. بالتأكيد يحتاج الأمر منا الكثير من العمل، ولكن ما نستطيع أن نقوله أننا أعدنا إصلاح العلاقة بين الشعب السوري وحكومته.
Excellency Dr. Khulaifi, a similar question to you, starting out big picture. Qatar and your government has taken a strong and consistent stance on Syria since the very beginning, and I think was ideally placed to adapt to the fundamental transformation we saw a year ago. I mean, how would you characterize from Qatar's perspective how the past 12 months have gone? What are you envisioning from your policy perspective, what year two needs to look like? What are your new challenges as we enter into this second year of Syria's transition?
Thank you very much, Charles, and it's good to be in this panel with my distinguished colleagues. A few points to take into consideration when we're discussing the Syrian case. First of all, Qatar has been very firm when it comes to its position in full support of the Syrian people. In 14 years, we haven't changed that position. When we see the others, they were shifting in the political decision, we remain firm, believing strongly that this is the right path for the Syrians to restore their full rights, a country that is sovereign, that is prosperous, and providing an opportunity for the people to live a better life. This is something that is very critical in the top leadership of the country, following up the administrative bodies, and we've been very much engaged since day one of that topic. If you allow me, interesting fact, last year at this forum, in this hotel specifically, we were discussing the Syrian case, following up the movements by the Syrians on the ground. Interesting fact, we spent more than 4 or 5 hours with the group, the Astana group format, as well as regional countries, discussing what is going to be the next step. Is it going to be reasonable now for Bashar al-Assad to lower the bar and start engaging productively? But our friends and our brothers didn't save time, I think, for that operation. Things has moved so quickly. Our policy since day one, never shy out. Engage, go and talk to our brothers over there on the ground, stretch our hands of support and help for the Syrian people and the Syrian government. And we've been very consistent, honestly, in terms of that help. We have a highly distinguished institutions, even at the humanitarian level. Qatar Funds for Development, education above all. All of them, they've been outreached over there and they've been engaged in several activities and projects within the Syrian government. I think in terms, if I want to assess the 12 months for Qatar's and Syria partnership, it's never been stronger. We've been so close and we've been very engaged in the different sectors, at the energy sectors, at the financial sectors, even at the international level. We've been very much supporting that Syrian cause because we strongly believe in it. We think this is the right pathway and this is what the Syrian people believes and deserves. And therefore, I think how we see generally Syria, we see it regionally as well. We've seen the developments in the regional countries as well, and that brings, honestly, comfort at the decision makers levels in Doha and in the general wider scope. We've seen the developments in Lebanon, for example, with the election of presidents and the permanent government. We've seen the recent election in Iraq. All of them, that helps us that the movement is on the right pathway when it comes to the political stability. That helps us, but we will always consider ourselves a reliable partners for those regional countries, and we will continue to engage with them.
Thank you. Minister Eide, you as Foreign Minister of Norway, you were an early visitor to Damascus, and so you've visited and seen things from very early on since Assad's fall. Again, a similar question to you, but obviously from Norway's perspective and the wider European region, which traditionally has looked at Syria with different priorities. So from your perspective, what steps has Norway taken over the past 12 months to engage and to support Syria's transition? And as you look to year 2, with all of the challenges that Syria faces, as they pertain to Norway and to wider Europe, what's your assessment today?
Thank you, Charles. So I also vividly remember the Saturday of Doha Forum a year ago, where in the morning panels we were discussing whether ever Assad would go, and in the afternoon panel he had left. So, it was very much being present at a very historic moment. And I was looking back at the statement I made and many of my colleagues made, and found out that they were quite good. We said, this opens up an opportunity. It will not be easy. The new forces, the new government needs our support. We need to give this a chance. We shall not be naive, but we need a process that is Syrian-owned and Syrian-led, and we want an inclusive Syria. And I also argue that if we do not give this opportunity a chance, we will probably be right. I mean, if we assume it will fail, we will help it to fail. If we, however, we assume that it can succeed, we might contribute to the Syrian success, but the success has to be a Syrian success. And I must say, recognizing the long list of challenges that the government still faces, and let's not be naive, I think on balance, this year has been well spent. And I have to say, being a frequent critique of the international community, this time we got it right. There was a broad agreement from an surprisingly early stage that we should not leave the new government with inherited sanctions for the failures of a previous government. Well, let them at least do their own failures before we sanction them. And that argument, I went, as you said, early January, when an early visitor came out very strongly, arguing with our American friends, our European friends, we need to do something on these sanctions, and that largely worked. And I think that encouragement was so important, and my early meetings with President Al-Sharaa was very much focused on practical aspects of economy, the need for early recovery, to reap this peace dividend while people still had trust. And I'm proud that we were able to establish links on energy, on health, on transitional justice, on other key issues, but also increasingly working with the government. And we were early in working with the government directly, and in hindsight, I think we got it right this time.
Yes, absolutely. And Ambassador Barrack, just tying on to exactly what Minister Eide was just saying on the question of engagement and sanctions and all of the developments we've seen take place over the last 6 months or so in particular. It's not a secret that there were components of the Trump administration that were probably skeptical of Syria when President Trump first came into the office. But of course in May, to the president's huge credit, he took the step to meet with President Al-Sharaa in Saudi Arabia and fundamentally changed the game. So my question to you really is just, what drove that decision and the extraordinarily bold, I think, step that the US government has taken since, which has broken every record in terms of sanctions relief and diplomatic engagement in post-conflict environments?
Number one, thanks, Charles, for heading this super important panel. But I think, and you heard from Don Jr., who I'm so proud of for everything that he and his family has accomplished through great political battles. But with credit to my boss, President Trump, which is not political, right? The vagaries of the West are not attributed to one political party or another. But since 1916, the West has not done a very good job at guiding or providing architecture to this region. Since Sykes-Picot, almost every decision that the West has imposed on the region, rather than letting the region evolve itself, has been a mistake, and we're living with the aftermath of that. So, although President Trump may be unpredictable in some senses, he's really not. He's studied. And he saw the vagaries of the past, of what had happened with our interference in coups and regime change from World War II. We invented everything, right? We invented NATO. We invented the United Nations. We invented UNESCO. We invented the CIA. We invested the Marshall Plan. We invested Bretton Woods. And if you were to evaluate all of them and their efficacy on this region, you'd probably give them a very low mark. President Trump had studied the situation, and quite honestly, when he got off the plane in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and the Crown Prince had invited the foreign minister's boss, President al-Shara, he made a determination on the ground based on lots of study that this region is about athletes. It's not about federalism. It's not about democracy. It's not about centralization. It's about leadership. He decided, and spending some time with President al-Shara, that to give them a chance, to give this leader the opportunity to create their own architecture and allow it to happen without interference. So what we did, the contribution this time for America, was very different than it's ever been. We said, we're not going to labor you with hopes and expectations of a democratic structure that has never been feasible in the past. We're going to allow you to decide your own structure. Miraculously, in that 10 months, the foreign minister, who I spend a lot of time with, I applied to be his barista, but I can't keep up with him. He's a rocket ship. They all are. And I have to tell you, I think from President Trump and Secretary Rubio's point of view, which we do, in relieving them of sanctions, we go through a report card. If you remember, Secretary Rubio in March had sat down with Foreign Minister Al-Shaybani and given him a section of 8 expectations of things that you all want. Integration of all the communities, the continuing investigation into missing persons, the care and taking of camps, the dismantling of foreign fighters, the chemical weapons, which has always been an issue. And honestly, on those issues, for a very small team, in my humble personal opinion, I give them an A in all of those categories in which they had very limited resources. So I think President Trump's instincts, along with a very understandable team headed by Secretary Rubio in evaluating lessons of the past, was all about, let's pick the athletes, not necessarily the stadium. And in our estimation, it's heroic and epic what they've done in what will be 2 years and a couple of days. And what we all have to do is help them, entitle them, encourage them, and allow them to form the kind of government and inclusive regime that they, the Syrians, would like to do. But we're very proud of them.
Thank you very much. Minister Shaybani, back to you. When you entered Damascus, one of the things President Shara publicly announced very early on was the importance of Syria having a foreign policy that sought problems with nobody. In other words, a balanced foreign policy. You seek to engage with everyone, whether you have differences or similarities. And I think over the past year, you know, I'm not an expert on Asia or other regions of the world, but I can't think of many countries around the world that have managed to sustain, especially in a complex post-conflict environment, a balanced relationship with every one of the world's major players and everyone in between. My question to you really is how long do you think that complex foreign policy can be sustained? It is going to get more complicated with time. Do you think that there will come a time when you'll have to start choosing to prioritize more in one direction than the other? Are you already facing that situation? And if you do, how will you deal with that challenge?
شكرا لك. بالتأكيد يعني بعد تحرير سوريا، وخاصة يعني بعد أن تفاجأنا بحجم التدهور الذي وجدناه في يعني المؤسسات السورية، وأيضا بالإرث السياسة الخارجية التي أيضا ورثناها من النظام البائد، أن هناك علاقات سيئة جدا مع الجوار، علاقات سيئة جدا مع الدول الأوروبية، مع الولايات المتحدة، وأيضا هناك قائمة غير لا يمكن تحديدها من العقوبات. فتفاجأنا بالكم الهائل من هذه المقيدات أو هذه القيود التي ستعرقل عملية إعادة البناء التي بدأناها بعد الانتهاء من إسقاط النظام البائد في اليوم التالي يعني مباشرة. بالتأكيد أن بناء أي سياسة متوازنة في بلد في الشرق الأوسط ربما هذه من أصعب المهمات التي ربما تحاول كل البلدان وكل الدول أن تجاهد أن تحافظ يعني على سياسة متوازنة، خاصة أننا في عالم مستقطب، في استقطاب كبير جدا، وخاصة في منطقتنا أيضا هناك حساسية عالية جدا من أي اصطفاف وأي توجه، وأيضا هناك يعني قراءة معمقة جدا لأي تحرك حتى في النوايا وفي التصريحات السياسية، وأيضا حتى في المشاريع الاقتصادية وحتى في المشاركات الدولية. فتقريبا الشرق الأوسط نحن تحت المجهر في كل تفصيل، لكن بلد مثل سوريا بالتأكيد يحتاج إلى علاقة هادئة مع الجميع، ويحتاج أيضا أن تساعده الدول على تحقيق هذه السياسة أيضا. يعني نحن نطلق النوايا ونطلق التحركات، ولكن أيضا الاستجابات من الدول يجب أيضا أن يساعدونا على إنجاز هذه المهمة، لأن البناء بلد عانى من الحرب بعد 14 سنة بالتأكيد يحتاج إلى الكثير من الأصدقاء، ويحتاج إلى كل الأصدقاء، ولا يحتاج إلى أن نختار وأن نتخير من نريد وماذا لا نريد، أو أن نصطف باصطفافات حتى لو كانت تقليدية، وهذا الشيء سيعرقل من مسيرة إعادة الإعمار. بعد إزالة نظام الهدم الذي كان متمثل بالنظام البائد، بدأ النظام وحكومة البناء. حكومة البناء تحتاج إلى استقرار أمني في الداخل وأيضا ربط مع الأمن الإقليمي والدولي، وهذا ما نعمل عليه مع يعني أشقائنا في المنطقة وأيضا مع الشركاء الدوليين. ويحتاج إلى تنمية اقتصادية مكثفة وفرص استثمارية، ويحتاج أيضا إلى دبلوماسية تعزز وتسهل هذين الركنين. بالتأكيد اليوم سوريا تتمتع بعلاقات متنوعة ومتعددة، ونطمح إلى أن تكون هذه التجربة أيضا ملهمة وفريدة في المنطقة، ونعتقد أننا سننجح، لأن هناك أيضا إرادة دولية بإنجاح هذه التجربة، وأيضا هناك إعجاب، خاصة أن الدبلوماسية التي ننتهجها في سوريا هي دبلوماسية واضحة وشفافة وفيها الكثير من الصدق، وليس فيها يعني اللف والدوران خلينا بالعامية يعني، لكن فيها التركيز على هدف أننا نحن عانينا كثيرا من هذه الحرب، نريد أن نعيد بناء بلدنا، نريد الكثير من الأصدقاء، لا نريد أن نكون بأي اصطفاف. فضمن هذه المعايير أعتقد أننا إلى الآن نجحنا. ربما في المستقبل ستكون هناك تحديات، وربما ستجر سوريا إلى بعض المناطق الحرجة، ولكن سنعيد التركيز أننا على مسافة واحدة من الجميع، ونريد أن تكون علاقاتنا قائمة مع الجميع على أساس من التعاون والاحترام والشراكات السياسية والاقتصادية.
Thank you. So just to exactly tie into that question, Your Excellency Khulaifi, the Middle East has experienced quite a profound time of crisis over the past couple of years. And there's a sense to which, whether you look west, east, north or south, the region appears to be in a state of flux. Of course, the aspiration and the objective here is that should all offer an opportunity for a more peaceful future. And I think Syria has a kind of central role geographically as well as strategically to play in there. But as Minister Shaybani was just saying, there is the potential that Syria could face some sensitive geopolitical challenges in the coming month. And of course, there are sensitive internal challenges in Syria too. So I just wonder, without wanting to put more things on your very busy agenda, is there an opportunity for a country like Qatar, which specializes so much in mediation, to attempt to tackle or add to the attempts to tackle some of those sensitive geopolitical challenges that surround Syria today?
Well, first of all, Syria is on my agenda. And on behalf of the state of Qatar, we've been, as I told you, the strategy is to continue our direct engagement with our Syrian colleagues on the different sectors. In the past 12 months, we were focusing on the main infrastructure, within the country, aviation, financial industry, energy. The projects that we have accomplished so far is pleasing. However, it's still not enough. There are still more potential for Syria to prosperous with other areas and other fields. And I believe the openness that we have seen from President Shara and from the governments to international investors to join and play an important role within the future of Syria is something that very critical and will put Syria in a unique place in the future. One element which worries us a lot is the security element. This is something that I believe, and I had a thorough discussion with our savvy lawyer and friend, savvy ambassador, I apologize, and friend Tom Barrack on the security element and the importance for Syria to be preserved and the people will feel safe within the country, something that is extremely important. The Israeli aggression on Syria is unacceptable, and this is something that needs to stop. Syria needs to be provided with the opportunity to do that, and we've been calling for the international community to hold that responsibility of preventing any further escalations on Syria. This is something that is equally treated on Lebanon, where we see the government is acting around the clock in developing and improving the internal situation in the country. So those countries in the region needs to be provided with that opportunity. And I believe empowering in the next phase, if I can see how Syria can move in the next phase, focusing on that security element is something that is extremely important. We will continue our engagement with the Syrian governments on that angle and other angles as well, and also our direct coordination at the international level. I mean, you might heard in the past of what we call by the Friends of Syria. This is an important group. We needed to revive the international coordination on the Syrian file to put it on top when it comes to the important matters that the Syrian governments needs to take into look, or even work closely with the Syrian governments to overcome many of those challenges. I believe in the upcoming months, it will be very critical for us to engage even further, to work closely with the Syrian governments to combat many of those challenges and especially the security threats that the Syrians are facing, encouraging and continue to encourage the governments to take the important steps for the Syrian people. And I believe we had a very thorough and transparent engagement also with the Syrian governments on that line. I honestly, among the other cases, and you gave us a very good introduction about the, sorry to say this, but the unfortunate situation that our Middle East is in, that there are still hope. And we see hope in Syria. And we think the future will be, inshallah, better. Thank you.
Yes, inshallah. I totally agree. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of greater levels of international coordination and coordination with Damascus. And I think as we enter year 2, that will be all the more important. Minister Eide, on a slightly different tack, the international aid space has taken a significant hit and challenge over the recent years, not just because of instability, but of course, significant cuts from the United States have placed more of a burden on other traditional donors to the international aid world, of which Norway has played traditionally a significant role. And the issue on Syria, of course, is that we are now in transition, and so we will see a pivot away from aid and more towards early recovery, and of course investment once the Caesar Act, we hope, is removed within days. But nevertheless, there is still a huge strain in there. And in Syria, there is still huge need for similar activities as we pivot more towards that investment direction. So really just from your perspective, but also from Norway's wider engagement within Europe and the rest of the international community, are there efforts underway to try and fill some of those gaps in a case of like Syria?
Thank you. Let me just one sentence on the geopolitics, because I think the best thing Syria can do for the geopolitics of the region is exactly what it does, which is to focus on Syria. And I see the Prime Minister of Lebanon. I think it's quite welcome for some of the neighbors that Syria focuses on Syria, because we've had Syrians who focused on other things, and breaking the direct geographical link between Iran and Hezbollah, for instance, is an improvement in regional security. And that's just because Syria focused on Syria. And I think other countries in the neighborhood, including Israel, should, contrary to what they are doing, they should actually recognize that we have a Syria that wants to be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, but with a focus on rebuilding Syria. Which brings me to your question, because if that's good for geopolitics, it means that the rest of us would be well advised to help them to recover quickly. And we, for our sake, for Norway's sake, is that we've already moved beyond early recovery. We're into long-term recovery, to long-term investments and developments. Of course, it's early days for classical investments, but focusing on energy, for instance, is a very important prerequisite for other industrial initiatives, for rebuilding of key infrastructures. So working on, not only humanitarian aid and early recovery, but actually engaging in economic development, where you'll need some help from your friends. But Syria is a country of traders. It's in the middle of the region. There's a tremendous economic potential that the president and the foreign minister and others keep speaking about. So it's really to connect to that, and let's not wait too long, because if we don't act early, more negative trends can follow. Not necessarily to comment on American developments, but it is a problem that development support from traditional donors is falling. It happens with USAID, but it also happens with other countries, sometimes for ideological reasons, sometimes more for lack of money. That means that the rest of us who are still in need to use our money smarter, and also think about how state development money can also, in a more immediate and faster way, inspire private investments and more traditional economic recovery and opening up for trade.
Thank you. Ambassador Barrack, this is a tricky question here, which is, rightly or wrongly, correctly or incorrectly, the United States often gets lumped with the responsibility to fix big problems. And when it comes to Syria, the issue of Israel has come up repeatedly, and I think that remains a significant challenge. And I know one that you have been engaged in. But also the integration of the Syrian Democratic Forces into the state, which has been a challenging file for the last 10 months or so, as well as the challenge related to Sweden. And I noticed yesterday that we now have State Department engagement with the Sweden file, with some meetings that were held yesterday. So I just wonder if I could ask you for perhaps to update the audience on where those three particularly thorny geopolitical and internal challenges stand, and where your and the United States engagement stands on those.
Thanks for that very simple question. Look, everything is in process, and let's start from the beginning of America's point of view. America was engaged in one of the most brutal battles ever in history, called the Civil War. Now, all of us in the Western world no longer want to talk about minorities, but the Civil War was a majority in the Union versus a minority, which was Confederates. And we have spent 100 years trying to define, what is that? Is that a federation? Is it a republic? Is it a union? What is it? How do you blend these communities, which have different cultural aspects and different desires, different religions, different educational formats, hundreds of years of their own history, in a country like America, which has a new beginning? How do you do it in a civilization that has thousands of years of history, in which survival was based on the tribe, it was based on family, it was based on your brother? Then it evolved to a community, and then from a community it evolved to religion, and from religion then it evolved into sectors, and ultimately we invented nation states. There was no such thing until the beginning of the 1900s. So blending these very difficult issues, America has taken the point of view of unwrapping the problems that lead to those solutions. And we're trying to do the same thing with Lebanon. We have great new leadership everywhere. Great new leadership in Syria, great new leadership with the Prime Minister Nawaf and President Aoun in Lebanon, great new leadership here, and thank you for hosting, I think, what we all feel is one of the most important forums where we can actually have these discussions. In Qatar with Sheikh Tamim, MBS in Saudi Arabia, MBZ in UAE, we have a new set of opportunities. first thing that has to happen is we have to allow them, Syria, to define it themselves without going in with Western expectations of saying we want a democracy in 12 months. We've never had a democracy anyway. I don't see a democracy. Israel can claim that it's a democracy, but in this region, really what's worked the best, whether you like it or you don't like it, is a benevolent monarchy. That's the function of what's worked. So we're inventing something else. And every time the West steps in and says, okay, here is a kind of parliamentary dialogue that we want to have. Every time we step in, whether it's Libya, Iraq, all of the places that we've been to try and create a colonialized mandate, it has not been very successful. We end up with paralysis. So our view is, give direction. All of us need to weigh in, not criticize, not say we need more foreign fighters released more quickly, not say we need more missing persons found more readily, not say the communities are being punished unfairly until they, in baby steps, get there. They just have taken over command and control. They need stability first. We need to give them the opportunity to incorporate all points of view, but at the end of the day, all points of view don't create a nation. They need to define what creates a nation. Is that centralization? Is it federalization? Is it a hybrid? What is it going to be? And from America's point of view, what we've learned is we are not good at imposing those expectations, especially in the Middle East, on others. Israel is a confusing situation. What I think this president and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have done, hand in hand with Qatar, by the way, and I'm here to tell you as a soldier on the ground, none of this would happen. Whatever we think about what happened in Israel, the greatest thing that ever happened is we got a ceasefire and return of hostages. It would not have happened without Qatar's intervention. It would just not have happened. And one of the most disappointing things, and I heard it was a great discussion between Tucker Carlson and Sheikh Mohammed. I'm telling you as somebody who's been in the middle of this, Sheikh Mohammed, under the Emir's tutelage, was the most important person for us to keep a dialogue with Hamas. No matter how the West views it, they were wrong. If we didn't have that, if Turkey didn't step in alongside, who was also criticized for having a dialogue with Hamas, we would not be where we are today. So we have to take a look at that as we look at Syria and Israel. It's baby steps. It's baby steps with Israel. It's a process, right? It's not an event. We're going to have speed bumps. We're going to have atrocities that continue. We're going to have dilemmas. We need to bring Lebanon and Syria together and aligned, two of the most ancient and beautiful civilizations. Iraq is having the same dilemma through paralysis in its own parliamentary process. We don't want to interfere in those political discussions. My hope and my belief is that we're going to go from the payphone to satellites. We're not going to have the iterative process. And the young leadership that we have in Syria, in Lebanon, in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE holding their hands, I have great hope. But it takes all of us relieving the pressure we're putting on these places with what our expectations from the West are and giving them resources that they need.
Please.
Can I just, I very much would like to second that. I think what Tom Barrack just said is incredibly important. When we say Syrian-owned and Syrian-led, it also means that we have to accept that they will find their way. The Syrian government tells us that they want an inclusive government. I welcome that. I think that's wise. But it's a Syrian choice, not my choice, nor America's choice. It's something they do. And I think we Westerners, historically, which I very much like to your point, is that we tend to forget how states emerge. You know, states emerge because somebody takes power, consolidates power against somebody else, and eventually you build a structure around that, and rule of law and so on comes later. And you know, it was not like there was a country called Syria. It's still the same country, but it's not like a state that was ready and you just change a few people at the top. You actually have to consolidate that power in order to be able to do anything in that place. And this is sometimes overlooked. So I think a mature recognition of how these things work in practice is very welcome. Will actually bring us further towards something that is stable and lasting in Syria. So I think that was really wise words.
Thank you for adding that. Minister Shaybani, I want to sort of bring back the same question I asked Ambassador Barrack, but of course get your opinion on it. The challenge that you face with your Israeli neighbors is growing, I think. Last month, for the first time, we had more than 100 ground incursions in 30 days. On average, throughout the rest of the year, we've had half that. So a doubling of ground incursions in a month in November, which places very significant pressure on you and your government. Can you give us a bit of an update on what looks like a stalled track of direct talks which you had been engaged in, whether there is a prospect for that to be renewed, and of course, most importantly, what are your positions with regards to those talks? What are your red lines? What is your vision for where those talks would go in an ideal world?
شكرا لكم. حقيقة هو من أبرز التحديات التي ربما يعني يعيشها الشعب السوري حاليا وأيضا تعيشها سوريا حاليا بالمرحلة الانتقالية هي مسألة إسرائيل. الجانب الإسرائيلي منذ اليوم الأول في 8 ديسمبر العام الماضي والى اليوم هو الجانب المقلق للاستقرار في سوريا، وهو يعني إذا ما عملنا استقراء للسياسات الإسرائيلية تجاه سوريا خاصة الإعلامية والسياسية وأيضا العسكرية والبرية، هناك يعني محاولة دائمة لزعزعة الاستقرار. إلا أننا أيضا نجحنا في يعني بكسب الكثير من الداعمين لمقاربة سوريا باتجاه إسرائيل، وأبرز هذه الدول الداعمة هي الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية التي أيضا هي داعمة لإجراء اتفاق أمني مع إسرائيل، وهذا ما نعمل عليه حاليا. الخط الأحمر الذي لدينا مع إسرائيل هو مسألة الانسحاب الإسرائيلي من سوريا، فلا يمكن أن نمضي في اتفاق أمني مع إسرائيل وإسرائيل تحتل أجزاء جديدة من سوريا بعد 8 ديسمبر، ويجب أن تعود الخريطة إلى ما كانت عليه في 7 ديسمبر العام الماضي، ويكون هناك يعني مقاربة ثنائية وأيضا عادلة للهواجس الأمنية للدولة السورية وأيضا للجانب الإسرائيلي. العملية الأمنية هي عملية ثنائية وتكاملية، لا يجب أن تكون من طرف واحد ولا تحترم الجانب الآخر. ونريد أيضا من الجانب الإسرائيلي أن يكف عن التدخل في الشؤون السورية، وأن أيضا أن يراهن على تحريك بعض الفئات من المجتمع السوري، أو أنه يغامر بمسألة تعزيز التفرقة في المجتمع السوري، فهذا ما سينعكس عليه سلبا أيضا في المستقبل. اليوم سوريا هي مركزة على سوريا، ونريد إعادة بناء بلدنا، ونريد أيضا علاقات هادئة مع الجميع بما فيها إسرائيل، ونحن ملتزمون باتفاقية 1974 وأيضا ملتزمون أيضا بالنهج الذي نقوده حاليا مع إسرائيل بوساطة أمريكية. وربما أبدت الحكومة السورية نضجا وعقلانية وأيضا دبلوماسية أكبر بكثير من الجانب الإسرائيلي الذي كان يعني في السابق يروج نفسه أنه النظام الديمقراطي الوحيد في الشرق الأوسط، ولكن أثبتت التجربة السورية على يعني حداثتها خلال عام واحد أنها أكثر عقلانية وأكثر دبلوماسية، واستطعنا أن نحشد الكثير من الأصدقاء في الدول العربية والأجنبية والأوروبية. فاليوم المجتمع الدولي داعم لمسار سوريا في هذا المجال، وكان آخره أيضا التصويت الذي اعترف أيضا مرة أخرى في الجولان كأرض سورية، وازداد ما يزيد عن 25 دولة داعمين لهذا التصويت عن العام الماضي.
Thank you. And Minister, I might just follow up with one more question before we run out of time to ask you about more on the side of economics and the economy. We are in Washington expecting some good news with regards to the repeal of the Caesar Act, which I think will be a huge opening of the window for all of the investment interest that has been declared, including here from Qatar and from the United States and elsewhere. From a very personal perspective, and I've been back to Syria 5 times since January, I've increasingly heard from ordinary Syrians the idea that, you know, with sanctions out of the way, there is an expectation of rapid improvements in terms of the quality of living. You know, how are you dealing with that challenge that all post-conflict countries will deal with, that the people expect more than is necessarily practical? There's a huge amount of reconstruction and rehabilitation that has to happen before we can see those real significant benefits. So how do you deal with that challenge, both of course from as you as the foreign minister, but more widely as the government?
إذا ما بما يخص الوضع في سوريا خاصة بعد 8 ديسمبر أعتقد أننا نجحنا في أمور كثيرة، وأيضا لا زالت لدينا تحديات كبيرة جدا. فنحن لدينا مقاربة واقعية ولدينا أيضا اعتراف بالواقع. بالتأكيد لو اجتمع العالم بأسره على أن يحول الوضع في سوريا خلال سنة واحدة من دولة كانت تحت يعني وطأة الحرب إلى دولة متقدمة خلال عام، يعني هذا الأمر يحتاج إلى وقت ويحتاج إلى إمكانيات ويحتاج أيضا إلى يعني خطط يعني مستدامة. لكن ما قلته في البداية أننا استطعنا أن نعزز ثقة الشعب السوري بنفسه، وهذا هو رأس مالنا الحقيقي، أن الشعب السوري يشعر بنفسه أنه قادر على أن يكون جزء حقيقي في بناء بلده. الشيء الآخر أيضا الحكومة السورية الحالية هي أيضا من يعني هي من خرجت أيضا هي من بين الشعب السوري، وهي أيضا عانت نفس المعاناة التي عاشها الشعب السوري خلال السنوات الماضية. وأيضا هناك يعني كل وزارة لديها خطة تطويرية في قطاعها. بالتأكيد هناك بعض الأمثلة التي تحسنت في سوريا، وخاصة موضوع الطاقة وموضوع الأمن وموضوع المواصلات. بالتأكيد موضوع الحرية السياسية وموضوع الحقوق وموضوع أيضا المشاركة السياسية وموضوع الانتماء الذي أيضا كان مختفيا أو يعني غير لم يكن على أجندة الشعب السوري في السابق، وكان هناك يعني غربة يعيشها الشعب السوري في وطنه، واليوم هذا الأمر قد تجاوزناه. إذا ما عملنا مقارنة، إذا ما قمنا بمقارنة بسيطة جدا بين 8 ديسمبر العام الماضي واليوم، سوريا كانت ربما من المواضيع المزعجة داخل البيت الأبيض. اليوم أصبحت الولايات المتحدة تشير صراحة إلى أن سوريا دولة شريكة لها، وأن أيضا سوريا كانت في لدى الاتحاد الأوروبي كانت هي أيضا من المواضيع الإنسانية التي كانت تسعى كيف نرسل مساعدات، كيف نوقف الهجرة من سوريا. اليوم أصبحنا نتحدث عن كيف ننظم العودة إلى سوريا وأيضا كيف نستثمر في سوريا. أيضا سوريا كانت هي في ينظر لها أنها كانت يعني مصدر للتهديد، اليوم أصبحت منظر ونموذج للإلهام والنجاح. الشعب السوري بنفسه كان ينظر إلى المستقبل بعين من الخوف واليأس، اليوم ينظر إلى المستقبل ويسارع يعني الخطى للمضي إلى المستقبل، لأنه يعتقد ويؤمن أن المستقبل سيشكل له الدولة التي يؤمن فيها. فاليوم أعتقد ما تم تحقيقه على الجانب المعنوي والجانب يعني إعادة تصوير سوريا وإعادة بناء تصورات حول سوريا خلال عام واحد، نجحنا في هذا الموضوع. بالتأكيد الجانب الخدمي والاقتصادي هذا ما ستركز عليه الحكومة السورية في عام 2026 وأيضا خلال الأعوام القادمة في جميع القطاعات، وكنا قد ركزنا على القطاعات الخدمية، وأيضا الصناعة أيضا عادت إلى سوريا، وأيضا انتعشت القطاعات الأساسية بشراكات مع الشركات الأمريكية وأيضا شركات قطرية وشركات سعودية وشركات تركية. وهناك اليوم رغبة كبيرة جدا في الاستثمار في سوريا. فنحن كشعب سوري أو كسوريا حقيقة لسنا خائفين من التقدم الاقتصادي والتقدم في مستوى العيش وإعادة بناء بلدنا، لأن هذا لدينا الرأس مال الحقيقي وهو الشعب السوري. ما نخشاه هو التهديدات الأمنية التي نراها إما من داعش أو من الجانب الإسرائيلي أو من ميليشيات عابرة الحدود لم ترضى بالتغيير الذي حصل في سوريا. وأعتقد أننا إن شاء الله في منتدى الدوحة العام القادم سنتكلم عن نماذج حقيقية للنجاح الميداني الذي حصل في سوريا، خاصة أن اليوم أصبح الكل يعني وهناك حقيقة هذا أمر يجب أيضا نعترف فيه، هناك رغبة دولية لرؤية سوريا دولة ناجحة، وأن تكون قد تخلصت من نظام دكتاتوري شمولي، وألا تقع في فخ الدولة الفاشلة وتنتقل إلى نظام ملهم، وأيضا يعني يبث بعض الأمل ويبث بعض المعنويات خاصة في دول الشرق الأوسط وفي العالم.
Thank you very much. And you took the words out of my mouth. That was going to be my closing, which is, yes, hopefully when we gather here a year from now, we will be celebrating even greater achievements of stability and prosperity for Syria. The only other thing I will say here is thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. I wish we had another 45 minutes. And in the meantime, good luck to Syria tonight.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you to all your panelists for this engaging discussion. I will not stand between all of you and one of the most anticipated moments of the day, lunch. But we hope to see you back here at 1:45 when we resume with a newsmaker interview with the Lebanese Prime Minister, Dr. Nawaf Salam. We'll see you back here at 1:45. Thank you.